Hi, my name is Alaine Baybayan, and I work as a character designer and animator in the industry. Right now, I'm working as lead character designer on my adventures with Superman, Warner Brothers Animation. I previously worked on Paramount, Powerhouse, The Line, Marvel. I've been around many projects, but as you do as an animator or character designer. Typically, I think I fall into a more stylized approach with art, and I'm hoping this is relevant to Proko and those learning anatomy, because Proko is a very good introductory resource just for any student out there. It's so important to have that, especially when you're stylizing, just to have that foundation and structure to your art. It's crucial for character design, for animation. So I'm hoping I can give some insight on how you can stylize, how you can use your anatomical knowledge to push your art and really show the dynamism as efficiently and as personally as you can. So I just get started. This is going to be a bit of an iPad tour / walkthrough of some of my pieces. This one I posted earlier last year. I was on vacation in Mexico and I just wanted to draw my OC. I'm a big fan of pinups or magazine photography, a lot of candid photography. Just as a start, just to be candid, it was very ugly the first time around. I try to be really loose, really gestural on the first pass. For this one, I wanted to make sure that the hand was in focus first. I'm a big fan of doing perspective. It's a good way to have fun with your work, but it's also a good way to cheat in the most part. You can really set up a composition really easily once you get a hand of perspective. You can plan out the planes, the composition, the blocking really easily. A lot of the art that I was inspired by was always playing around with that. Stuff like Trigger, Studio Mirror, Avatar, those are really big landmarks for me in terms of stuff that I wanted to emulate in my art. And I'm always trying to make sure that's captured in any way. This one, I started off with just this sketch, and you can kind of see how different it ended up being in the finish. I added the handout later, but the main structure is all down there. A lot of it turns into a mishmash of trying to fit as much fun information or as much breaks in the shape as I can. I'll keep moving on to another piece that will hopefully show more of what I'm talking about. This one's a drawing that I did a couple years ago back in school. It was during a lecture. Usually when I'm doing dynamic drawings, I'll just kind of sketch around a couple of ideas. This one was a first pass. I thought it felt good at first, but I think the legs were a little too wonky than what I would wanted. And even though I didn't use this one, I think it was informative to the next pass. That eventually led to this one. And this one's feeling a little better. The leg is a lot more straight. I decided to add this curve here for the scythe. If I think about it in a TV aspect ratio, it almost feels like it's a cinematic still that way. This was an initial sketch, and usually what I like to do is use as much of the original shapes as I can. Sometimes I don't even lower the opacity and then draw on you later. Sometimes I will just duplicate this and then keep stepping into it and just erase and redraw as I go. This is more of the colored version that's actually finished, but this was the final pass of the line art.
When you deal with such a dynamic pose, where do you go for reference?
Usually I will, for this one, just an example, this one I just came up with in class. And when it comes to thinking of one for my head, I think I just have a good menstrual library kept as a backup of shapes or pieces that I know I want to keep in the front. A lot of dynamic poses usually have a leg or an arm or a foot in front, and I'll try to structure a piece around that. I think for this case, I knew I wanted the shoe at the very front of the piece. So I tried to make sure I mapped that out first, and then I made the rest of the character around that. Other times I will use reference. I think that's just as important as being able to imagine a drawing on its own. And you could kind of do it in the same way where you pick a hand that you took a picture of yourself, or you find a piece of photography where the head is at a really cool angle, and then you can reconstruct the rest of it. So this one came from that one pose, and I brought it to completion. A lot of the line work just came from my own personal style, my own instincts, and my own shape language. I try to keep things really simple. Maka's a very dynamic character. She has a lot of pieces of clothing that move around, so I wanted to make that very strong with the triangles and the way it flows. Once I kind of mapped that out, it just came to coloring. It's a lot of playing around. There's a lot of doodles in there.
For some of the pieces that you're showing, you said they were things that you had posted on socials. Is it people seeing the work that you're showing here that will sometimes lead to you getting a job? Or is it more like you having a reel or other work that you've done in the field already?
It's kind of happened both ways, where I just do this for leisure. Like, this art was for leisure, but it did lead to me eventually getting my job that I have right now. It's funny because I posted a Percy Jackson animation back during COVID, and my current producer, Jake Wyatt, found it. And that's how I got my job on Superman, was that he just found this animation because I was really excited about it. Sometimes it's like my actual work on the show that will lead to something good or lead to an opportunity my way. But I'm always trying to emphasize that people who really like doing fan art, just post it out there. Or if you're feeling energized by a property, just to post that work, because you never know who's gonna see it. You never know who's gonna want to hire you for being a fan of something. I'll try to walk through a couple more doodles of just like things that I've gone around. I think this one was a study, or it started as some gestures I did off a K-pop dance video. I think those are so fun. I think they have really good blocking and movements. Dancing in general is really good for like dynamic inspiration. You're literally composing your body to look satisfying, and I'm surprised more people aren't like using it for fighting or for character acting as well. This one was the initial pose. I liked this one. I thought it was fun, so I went through a couple passes. This one I think was ugly. I wasn't satisfied with it that day, and then I'm more happy with this one. I actually think this one's pretty fun. This one I got more from imagination. I started on the head because I like drawing things from that angle like this, and then I kind of sculpted the rest of the body around that gesture. It somehow turned into this one. I think the perspective here just didn't make much sense to me, but then I liked this initial shape over here, so I decided to keep that, and then I changed the legs to kind of add some perspective on there. And then I added some swords because I think they're great for leading the eye. I think they're my favorite weapon. I love drawing a character with a sword. I actually have a more finished one, but not on this iPad at the moment. This one's a little Pinterest study I did before work. I think my back was hurting that day, so I did a little doodle to emulate that. I think this was like the initial sketch I did too. They're very messy at first. I don't try to spend too much time thinking about the structure or the shapes. I try to go as fast as possible. But this is always my favorite part.
With your use of Pinterest, do you just like scroll through and find stuff that'll be good for later?
Yeah, it's great brain food. Like, if you could scroll for hours. It really is just like endless feed of content to get an idea by. I recommend it. And Pinterest is like, that's one rabbit hole to fall down, but there's so many more down there. I drew this one in Montreal. I'm gonna turn this white just so it's a little bit more visible. This one was a girl I saw in a cafe. She was really pretty, so I wanted to draw her. This one's my friend Cece. I think I drew her while we were sitting in the hotel room. This was me because I was really tired that day. I think this one was also me as well. I like doing pages like this because then you just kind of fill in the blanks with whatever feels right. And it's like every drawing you do is like a rep. Drawing is like working out. It's like athleticism. If you're doing a bad drawing, then you might continue to make bad drawings. But it's okay. I think I've done my fair bad reps to at least get to this point where I'm talking at Proko. This one, I like to do a lot of just like big dumps of poses on my iPad where I will let my mind fly and just put out whatever shapes I am feeling like in the moment. I think these came from my head. This is kind of just like what I workshop through when I'm going through a drawing. This one I think was like a sword going that way. This one was just some perspective stuff. I ended up falling on this one because I thought it could be really cool, but it's a very messy sketch right now. And I think after some love and TLC, I kind of made this one out of it. I ended up coloring this one after a while.
What's your relationship with like reference when you're doing studies? Like, what's your methodology?
I think before I would try to rely on my own imagination, but after a while I realized how stupid that was. I realized it wasn't getting me hired or wasn't helping me keep a job. Use reference as a guide for your decisions is usually the best way I could go about it. Every single stroke you make is a decision. Everything that you put on the page is something that other people are going to see. I think it will always make your art stronger. It's just a matter of how you put your own spin on it. I really like using 3D models these days. Sometimes I used to draw over them. This one's a sheet of Superman that I did for like reference studies. When I was first starting out on the show, this was just some homework I was getting through. And what I did was that Clip Studio has a 3D head that you can turn around. You could put like in different focal lengths and depths and perspectives. And I was trying to learn the style, so I tried to mush the head to fit the model sheet of Clark, and then just turn him and then try to either trace off the 3D model myself, or I keep it on the side and try to just look at it and then draw it in my own way. I think it's good to use that as like a reference for proportions and landmarks. You can rely on it. You can use this reference. You can trace over a hand. You can use it as a shortcut. People do that in the industry because you have to be able to do these things quickly, but you have to have the basis beforehand to make it look good. You know, when you see someone trace art and it doesn't feel the same way as the original artist, it's because the original artist definitely knew what to do beforehand. They knew this eye was supposed to fit in this way. They knew this hair was supposed to make this shape. Just because you trace a drawing that someone else did doesn't mean you knew what decisions went into making those line arts or those like colors as well. Yeah, so these are a bunch of parks from a 3D head, and that's completely okay. This one is another case of using references, but not necessarily relying on it. One of my favorite resources out there is called Pose Maniacs. It's a free website that has 3D models of poses and musculature. And what you could do is you can turn them in any perspective. You can change the focal length. You can make it show in negative space. You can make the colors better if you want it for yourself. But what I like to do is they have a daily pose that they put in. And what I like to start my day with is just take that pose and turn it around and try to draw it in different angles. This one was like a sword one that I really like. Using the site has really helped with my idea of like a 3D camera and how cameras are supposed to work. I think earlier I used to really guess that type of stuff, but once you actually watch an object move in focal length, it gets easier to understand like how it's supposed to click together. I try to keep these ones really gestural. I don't have as much time these days to do like full anatomy studies, but you should still be doing that. It's really important. This one was another pre-work form up. Kind of the same case as just letting my mind fly and letting a bunch of ideas go loose. My favorite landmark to start with is usually the head. I think that will always lead the rest of the piece somewhere. So these were some gestural sketches I did. They're so messy, but it's not about the mess you make, it's about how you clean it up. Lately, I've been trying to conserve as much of the original shapes as I can in a drawing. I really like this slope down over here. I wanted to make sure everything felt like it was coming in that direction. I try to keep that shape in there, but then sculpt out the rest of the anatomy in that shape, if that makes sense. And it's been helping a lot. The style of our show is really inspired by like Studio Mirror or like Avatar. They're really good at making sure they feel correct, but also very dynamic and alive. This one was another one that I did. Another one I wanted to show was, I did an animation earlier this year. Actually earlier last year. I was kind of working on it idly. I kind of consider it a sketch because it was very unserious and on my own time. I was listening to his song and I just thought it was so fun that I wanted to block out some fun animation to it. And this was like the first initial pass, very dirty, something that definitely only makes sense to me. I used a 3D head to kind of dictate the way this was going to be cleaned up. I think this process is very much step one, put your guidelines, step two, draw a person. Not a lot of in between in there.
For your work, is this like similar to what you would normally be doing?
Yeah, you don't want to spend too much time with the pre-planning on an animation. Like that could really put you into a hole where you did all this work, but then you're going to have to change it. Someone's going to want something redone or redrawn. So you should make it as informative as possible.
For like your current job, it's not like a board-driven kind of show?
I would say it's very board-driven. Yeah.
Okay, so you guys get to have a little bit more creative control for the scenes then?
Definitely. It's not to the point where you're relying on the drawings of the boards, or at least they try to make it as spelled out as they can. In the case of something like this was for my own personal enjoyment, so I didn't go too far with the initial drawings. There's also another half of this. This one I also had planned out. For this one, I really like simplifying the hair. I don't really like putting a lot of detail into line work when I can. We don't have as much time for it for our personal art these days. It might as well take the shortcuts if it's just for you. So I took the lasso tool and I just treated the hair almost like as an effects. If anyone uses Clip Studio, my favorite thing to do is use the lasso tool and you can set it up to autofill or any shape that you do. I like it in the case for animation. It's very similar to a tool that they have on Toon Boom where you can autofill your brush fills. And it's really great for doing effects. It's really good for blocking out shapes really quickly. It's really good for sketches, for filling out shading on your work. You can also set it to delete. I'm a big fan about this. I think it speeds up things so quickly and I use it all the time. This one is a character from the show that I worked on. This is Lois. I drew as a volleyball player because I'm a big fan of volleyball. In my head, she's a really good middle blocker. I also have the beginning part of the animation I did there. Similar process where I lasso filled out all these shapes. I did all of the body first and the hair just kind of slathered on top. Here's it played out. This one has a ruff too. I think this one's a lot more constructed of a ruff compared to the first one that I showed. And kind of the similar mythology, I tried to keep as much of those original shapes and those lines in there.
What about the song that inspired you to make this animation?
I think the song literally possessed me. I think it would just like made me want to dance and made me want to move around. And I didn't have the ability to do that in the way that I envisioned it. So music's a great way to find inspiration in animation. I think a lot of my art is heavily inspired by it. So I try to make sure that the musical aspect is considered so the animation feels alive. This one's another drawing that I find people really resonated with. This is not the final one. I didn't color correct it on this program. It was a Zoro drawing I did because I was reading One Piece for the first time in 2023. I love the style. I thought the way he made solutions with the perspective. I'm really appreciative of how inks and like manga artists or comic artists go about doing dynamic art. And Oda just has a great eye for it. This was a very rough sheet I did, again, right before work of a bunch of different poses of Zoro that I potentially wanted to finish.
When you do a fan art piece, do you try to chase some of the energy and motion of the thing that's in the source material, or do you try to bring it to a place that you like more?
I think it's a mix of both. Like in One Piece, there's a lot of that already to go by. This one was definitely fed by all those initial drawings. And then I think a lot of my art is trying to chase that feeling for myself too. So I think in this one, I was happiest with this sketch over here. Very raw, very gestural. Coloring can save a lot of your art. It really does hide a lot of the imperfections in there.
Is Zoro your favorite character?
No, I love Trafalgar Law. I think he's the better sword character in my opinion.
Very true.
I don't have as much insight on coloring, but I do find I've been using a lot of the one layer method lately where you just combine everything together and you're like, oh no, there's a little thing here that should be filled in. I could just do it on that one layer. No one has to know at the end of the day.
It looked like you put a layer of noise.
Yes, I do like to do that a lot. I find for like online pieces, that's what I like to do. I think it kind of melds everything together. That's a lot more of like a personal choice, but it's an easy way to add like some grit and texture to your art.
Are there other things that you do? Like for me personally, I'll throw like say like a yellow layer over it, and so it kind of just unifies the colors and stuff.
Yeah, that's another one I like to do. Like adding an overlay just to, if I feel like the colors aren't popping enough. This one also is like an example of that.
What motivates using either Clip Studio Paint versus Procreate?
I like Procreate for when I'm drawing on the go. I find like it's the most straightforward program out there. It's so simple, anyone can learn it. It's cheap and it's really accessible. But Clip Studio is the one that I use the most on my computer. But it has a really good like gateway between the both of them. I can just like transfer it on my iPad. And they've also made it easier on Clip Studio to draw on your iPad. They added a view that essentially turns it to Procreate-esque layout. So it doesn't have all those like buttons on either side. I've been doing this a lot more lately and it's been a lot of fun. But I find I always go back to Procreate when I'm on here. This was the first pass I did of this drawing. And then after some more cleaning up, this is kind of what I turned it to. I find like a lot of these drawings are fun to do, but I have a hard time posting them because they don't show the face of the character. And then I'm like, oh, maybe they won't really recognize them. But I love these type of panels in mangas where they show them from behind. I think there's a lot of fun shapes that come from these types of angles or when you can't see the character. It feels really intense, but I feel a lot of intensity from their body language. This one, I merged all the drawing together and then I kind of did my own touch-ups. Tried to keep the lines a little dirty because I like when they're really sketchy. And I shaded, then I added just like an overlay layer until I was satisfied with the color, and then just some noise to kind of tie it all up. This one I did on the plane to light box. I'm showing a lot of Sasuke here. I always try to go pretty thick with it at first, just try to like block out as much as I can with the shapes with a brush where I'm not gonna be having to carry it too much. If I use a thin brush, I find that just wears out my hand and I can't get as many ideas across. It's almost like thumbnailing, and you could do this for sketches, you could do this for animations. It's just a lot more efficient. I'm trying to do a better practice of making sure I plan out the perspective and make sure the character is feeling grounded. This one I didn't really finish all the way through, but I kind of fell on this after a while. This one's more finished of a personal sketch that I did. I think this is the outfit I'm wearing right now, but I went biking in it when I was in Toronto. I swear I didn't coordinate this. Yeah, it was just a little outfit of the day drawing that I did for myself. There's another one on the side that I rendered out. I like to do a lot of pages. Sometimes if I'm feeling good, I fill out a whole page like this. I'm a big fan of drawing hands first in a lot of pieces. I think it's just an easy way to make a really cool piece. And I think it's such a complicated part of your body. So I try to pay a lot of emphasis on that when I'm drawing. And I find it's a great way just to make something feel like a tangible drawing, or just make it feel really alive. I think this is another more of my pose mania stuff, more gestural. I really try to work off of the gestures I try to fit in and just make a big sheet of them, making sure I understand how a body works in different perspectives. It's so important for not just working as an illustrator or just an artist, but as an animator, you're going to be turning every single character if they move like 5 degrees to the left. So I try to make sure I'm warmed up enough to know how stuff looks in certain positions.
It makes for like a drastically different day of work if you actually do the warm-ups beforehand.
Yes, definitely.
Do you do a lot of orthos for characters?
If I don't know the structure of a character too well, I'll try to fit that in, try to make sure I could emulate them in different perspectives. When it's my own character, I kind of figure it out on the fly. That's probably not the best thing if you're doing that for your own project. It's also because I work in character design, I realize that's actually important to do, to make sure you know how the back of them looks or underneath their cape looks. If you're working with another character, that's definitely important just to make sure you have a sense of what it's like warmed up beforehand.
How has it been trying to jump onto a project where we don't need you to be like Sushio on this one?
Definitely a lot of homework beforehand. That's why doing stuff like anatomy, that's always going to be the basis of what you do in art. If you don't do the boring stuff like this, or if you don't try to make this stuff interesting for yourself, you're not going to have a good playground to work with where you could lean towards another style. I recently did work on another freelance project. I can't talk about it yet, but I'm really excited about when I can talk about it. And it was just adjacent enough that I was able to emulate what they wanted from me, but it still took a lot of homework beforehand just to make sure that I could actually get to where they want me to be. Sometimes places will be patient with you for that. Sometimes it will take some more hard work on your end. When I first was on Superman, it did take me a while to get used to show style. And it took a lot of doing these studies and making sure that I was understanding the structure of what I was drawing as beforehand. The more you work on it, the more you realize, oh, there's actually so much more nuances in style that could be really neglected when you're not prepared for it. It's knowing the shape of the biceps. It's knowing the proportions of the characters. I noticed on our show style, the biceps are shorter than what I'm used to, or I realized I was drawing my biceps just way too long, like they were all the way down here. It's not until like someone points it out, or if you really just like break down a character entirely, that you notice these things. And that's also a really good thing to do, is like literally going out there and drawing out like this ratio to this ratio. That's another thing I didn't really talk about much, but has helped me so much, is figuring out the ratio of things from one to another. It's important in perspective, it's important in anatomy. Everything is in ratio to one another. You can draw anything if you put like a graph on top of it and you just know that if this point goes here, like that's going to be correct. And that's a good way to study and a good way to make sure that you understand how things are built. And that's like half the battle when it comes to art, is that you have the realisticness and the structure and the base down there. Then the rest of it is just the imagination and making the decisions that make your art appealing.
What is your favorite part when you're working on a character?
I think it's when all the shapes kind of work together. When you're looking at like a dynamic picture and like you kind of start to see a pattern of why it looks so strong. My arm would look so different if I was just holding it like this. Like you would think this is dynamic, but I'm just kind of sitting here. Whereas if I went like this, there's a bunch of strength in between that I can't capture in like a still motion. When you kind of get used to like simplifying and noticing those nuances, your art levels up so much. I'd say that's like my favorite part about it. I love finding like shortcuts as well when you're drawing a limb or when you're drawing a hand, and everything just kind of flows in the same place. And it's all just coming from noticing these specific patterns in the way something looks in motion. All of my work could be found like under my username Alaine, or you could search my name Alaine Baybayan on Google, and I have IMDb, I have Instagram, and Twitter, and yeah, I will be at Warner Brothers in the meanwhile. I hope that my work was sufficient enough to like give you some insight on drawing things with a little more life to it.
Alaine says perspective is one of the most useful tools for drawing dynamic character designs. So if you want to upgrade your own tool belt, go to proko.com/perspective and learn from one of the best perspective teachers on the planet, Marshall Vandroff. By the end of the course, you'll have a full understanding of the hows and whys of perspective. You'll know how to use them to your advantage. How do you use concepts like orthographic perspective and focal lengths in your own drawings? Start learning today at proko.com/perspective.